You are listening to Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. Welcome to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show, a monthly radio program that spotlights positive real estate development and neighborhood revitalization throughout Philadelphia. I'm your host, Derek Hingamill. Jumpstart Philly is a unique community development program that trains, mentors, networks, and provides financing to aspiring real estate developers in 7 different Philadelphia neighborhoods, including Germantown, where the program was founded. Jumpstart believes that you can do well by doing good and focuses on removing neighborhood blight, scattered site rehab, creating a healthy mix of affordable and market rate housing, and avoiding gentrification through slow, steady growth. Interviews are conducted during Jumpstart Germantown's Jump in Our series on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m., held via Zoom webinar or in person at our office. For information about these events, check out the events page at jumpstartgermantown.com. This week, I had a discussion with Pierre Streat, principal of a local business, Strongbow General Contracting, to talk about how new developers can build contractor relationships and hire reliable, affordable contractors for their rehab projects. I hope you enjoy the conversation, and be sure to check out the podcast version of this program at jumpstartgermantown.com/media. And we'll go ahead and start tonight. Thank you so much, Pierre, for joining us. I'll let people know how you got in contact with us. You emailed us letting us know you're interested in helping Jumpstart out with construction services and offering some of your knowledge and expertise. And we told you the best way to do that is get in front of a crowd through Jumpin' Ours. Yeah. So here you are, and I've looked at some of the work you've done, and we've talked a little bit about your sorts of development projects, and they sound like something you'd really align with Jumpstart on, especially newer developers, people looking for local, reliable people, that they can have work on their projects and have a face to a business, which is really great. So I appreciate you being here, Pierre, and why don't you go ahead and say hi and tell us anything else you want to tell us that I missed.
Yeah, no worries. So Pierre Streat, principal at Strongbow General Contracting. Before I formed this company, I was just basically buying single families and 2 to 4 units in Philadelphia just to develop for myself. I just sort of built up a skill set in the construction arm while doing that for the last 4 or 5 years in Philly. Mm-hmm. As a result of building up that skill set, I figured I could try and add value to other people, to try to help them out along the way, where they started out like me 4 years ago. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome.
But my main business is my investing in Philly. So we own about 37 rentals in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And 23 out of those 37 we developed ourselves in the last 2 years.
Awesome. That's great. So I love when we have a discussion with somebody who's been in the seat of the person, that we're trying to educate here. So it's just helpful to have something to relate to, it's like this person was in your shoes, so let me ask, what was your kind of introduction to construction and contracting? Did you have a background, prior to getting into real estate or anything, or did you kind of learn along the way as you started those projects?
Yeah, no. So just, I guess, a little bit about me. Before the real estate, I grew up in New York. I worked in finance for about 10 years, various investment banks. I'm a value investor by nature. So, I was always dabbling in stocks, and I bought a property in Brooklyn, New York. That sort of opened my eyes to the wealth building process in real estate. And I saw the value there. And this was back in 2009 or so. And at that point, I kind of wasn't very happy, in my finance role, and I figured, let me just see how this real estate thing goes. Mm-hmm. Went, looking outside of New York for cash flowing, markets, undervalued markets. And, it was between Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Cleveland, Ohio, were the 3 that I was looking at. And just the demographics of Philly and the potential there seemed higher than the other 2 markets that I was looking at. So I just started buying single families while working a full-time job in New York. And then I think around property 7 or 8 was when I took the leap and came down here full-time to buy, rehab, and rent properties.
Great. Awesome. And what's your experience with Germantown? Have you done any projects in there?
No, I haven't done any project with Germantown. Ken Weinstein is within a couple of network groups that I'm in Philly, the real estate side. So he's actually the one that told me that this would probably be a good idea
Great.
to sort of, work with other people on the contracting side.
Cool. So after you started doing projects by yourself in Philly, you were general contracting and acting as the developer and investor, kind of all in one. Were you like self-managing, or were you working with
Oh,
partners?
yeah. So, I mean, I've made the mistakes. I went through a bunch of GCs myself. That didn't turn out too well for various reasons. I mean, it's tough to find good contractors because, you don't really think about it, but you got to think about the incentive of the contractor versus your incentive, and they're never aligned,
Right.
unless they have an equity play in the projects, which most of the time you're not going to offer that on small single family jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I kissed a bunch of frogs in the GC world, and eventually I found a crew of guys who weren't being paid by the guy that I was paying, and I kind of just took them away from him because he wasn't doing what he's supposed to be doing. And I just built up, my contracted company that way. So, this stuff is not a science. I just want to let everyone know that it's sort of an art. It's experience. You're going to lose money. It's going to be tough, but if you stay focused and you learn from every experience that you have, eventually you'll get the right fit for you. I mean, I'm way more hands-on than most investors. That's the other part too. You got to decide how much you want to get involved in this.
Right.
If you want to continue to have a full-time job, maybe you can't run a crew like I do. So maybe the GC route would be better for you. But just set your expectations as far as what your goals are, how much you're willing to roll up your sleeves, and I would say take it from there.
Yeah, awesome. So I appreciate you giving us your background and everything. That's awesome that you walked through the steps that people are going through right now. In I don't know when you started investing, but probably a likely an equally as tumultuous and scary environment to start investing in, right? If you said your first project was in 2009, so that couldn't have been a great time.
Yeah, I mean, it was a permanent residence, so I didn't really have to do much renovation there, and it was in New York, so the price appreciation there is pretty stable. I didn't really have to do much work, but I mean, going through contractors, it's tough. I definitely get it, especially in Philly, and you got to sort of think, well, most contractors don't have a business mindset. Right? You're the business person, so you can't really expect them to have the similar mindset as you. Right. So they're going to make mistakes. They're going to screw up. And you kind of got to, be patient and train them along the way. Yeah. But I see a lot of investors making the mistake of thinking that, especially laborers are going to have the same mindset as you. They're going to do what you would do, but you can't think like that. That's a recipe for disaster.
So just to introduce the topic tonight, like building contractor relationships, I think that is the single most common response we get to people who, either submit a loan application and don't get approved for it, or, that they're trying a project or searching for deals or trying to create pro formas. Their number one thing is, I can't find a contractor to work on my project. They're too expensive, or, I don't trust them, or, they won't even respond to my call. I don't know where to look. It's like, that seems to be the focal point of people's frustration kind of at the start of the development process, when they're in that, beginning phase of scoping out deals and meeting people and getting their business together. Contractors are consistently, at least for Jumpstarter's perspective, it seems the biggest piece of the puzzle. So and I want to reiterate something you said a minute ago about how it's an art form. It's not like it's something you follow a list of steps and you're going to get a good contractor. So I think the first point, which I'm glad you talked about this a little bit, is to break that misconception that your first contractor is going to be perfect and lead you to success and make you a lot of money and never cause problems. That would be awesome. And maybe once in a million times that happens. Right. But so I just kind of want to identify that problem, right? And we're talking to those of you in the crowd here who have had trouble with that, and that's kind of the piece missing. So let's kind of talk about what are these people missing? Like, what is a general contractor? I know some people might have some experience in the construction industry and understand what that means, but for somebody who's brand new, how does a general contractor work differently than, say, a plumber, an electrician, or a carpenter, or something like that?
Sure, sure. So like a general contractor is responsible for the oversight, the management, and the communication, right, of like all the parties involved in a construction project. And like, all those parties include laborers, they include the supply houses, where you're getting supplies from, talking to the investor, again, running a business, right? Like it's tough to find laborers who know how to do all those things at once while, swinging a hammer. So that's the main value that, also, managing capital, right? It's going to be tough to build a business around a guy who can't float a couple $1,000, over a few days or a week, right? Most laborers need to get paid frequently, and they're not open to draw payments, on like 4 draw payments over, let's say, a couple months, right? So that's another value add, I think, with a GC. So what was your second part of your question? I apologize.
Sorry, I was muted. You answered it. Just kind of what is the difference between a general contractor and, say, a tradesperson who's working as a plumber, specifically on the electricity in your house?
Right. Yeah, and I think it ties in again to like how much you want to roll up your sleeves, right? Like if you're comfortable managing all the different trades, plumbing, electrical, ductwork, HVAC, I mean, that's up to you. But just keep in mind that requires for you to be on the ground constantly, and just really managing the entire process yourself.
And what is it
for that?
Yeah, and what does it take to become a general contractor? So what if somebody says they're a general contractor and can provide you with a license? What does that mean they've done?
Well, to be honest with you, it means nothing. Especially in Philadelphia, it's pretty easy to get a general contractor's license and insurance. I think the best contract, I'm not just saying this to toot my own horn, but I think the best contractors come from experience. And, for myself, I've seen both, like you said, both ends of the spectrum, being an investor and managing a GC and being a GC myself. But you can also find GCs who sort of just grew up in the trades themselves, right? Like maybe their dad was a GC and they've just been in that world and they know the skill sets and they're, the how to uphold OSHA standards, just based off experience. But that stuff takes time. You really got to do your due diligence to really, because I know some roofers that change, their contracting name every time someone sues them, right, in Philly, right? That you got to really do your due diligence on who you're dealing with. But don't be fooled that just because someone has a GC license and insurance, that makes them a general contractor.
Right. And just to be clear, like the license is the bare minimum, right? You don't want to be looking at people who don't even have a general contractor's license. That's like,
yeah, I mean, because it's required to pull permits, right, in Philly. So that's good that they can pull permits. Then doesn't necessarily mean that they know what they're doing, right, in terms of like, for example, electrical, right? Do they know like which wire to run for for example, a 220 wire for a condenser? Like versus a regular white or yellow wire. You got to know the difference. Otherwise, it just could be a fire hazard.
Yeah. Okay. So now that people understand what a general contractor is, what ways can they get acquainted with new ones, and how do they kind of cast that net?
I think the best source is references. Referrals. I mean, I'm sure you're rubbing shoulders with fellow investors with more experience than yourselves. And that's the other thing. Network with guys who are bigger than you, smaller than you. I mean, I've been lucky enough to meet fellow investors who are willing to share laborers with me just so we keep them busy within the same circles. Right. But I haven't found much success going online. I mean, you can maybe get lucky and, pull a laborer from Home Depot and sort of, grow him from there within your business. But I think the best contractors come from referrals.
Okay. Yeah. And like for people who might not, it might not be as clear as like, oh, my brother or my uncle is a contractor or something. Like, do you suggest they just start asking people willy nilly, like or should they look for people who kind of have an established, project or something they see work that's being done? They're like, oh, that's
Yeah, I mean, you can show up to a job site. You can show up to a job site, but still do your due diligence. I
right.
mean, you can find stuff online about contractors. You can go on Facebook groups and ask around. How people, if people know the contractor, any experience with them. But I highly recommend do your due diligence. Don't just go. I mean, I made the mistake myself. I met a guy who looked like straight off an HGTV show. Right, he's got like the sleeveless blue vest. And he looks like he's running a construction project, and he stole 20 grand from me. Right? I've met guys who showed up in Teslas and Audis to a project site. Like those are the guys that are going to steal your money. Right? Those are huge red flags. But that just comes from experience, right?
Right.
But like I said, do your due diligence, network, get referrals from people that you trust, whether it be family, friends, fellow investors. And I mean, it's tough, especially the last couple of years where interest rates are so low. These guys are busy and they have plenty of opportunities to, not just your project. So you kind of have to always show them that you have work for them after the next job. I mean, rates are a little higher now, so I would expect things to slow down a little bit. But yeah, it's not easy. Like I said, it's not a science. It's more so an art. It's hustling. It's doing your due diligence.
Yeah. And so, we can tell people to expect that it's going to be a difficult process and that they're going to go through, several contractors before they find one. But that doesn't mean that people should just kind of go take chances on anybody. So there's a bit of like a vetting process, and you kept using that word due diligence. And due diligence is something we use frequently at Jumpstart in terms of like before the project, because research on the market in the surrounding area, your construction budget, your operating expenses and taxes, like that's all the due diligence. But specifically talking about contractors, what sorts of due diligence should people be doing, outside of asking, their cousin, hey, how was he working on your project, or he or they,
I think you kind of have to have a general idea roughly how the process is going to be during your renovation project with a single family, right? Like the basics, right? If you've got bricks, you want to make sure the bricks are cemented and insulated. And you have framing, right? You want to use 2x6s on non-party walls, 2x4s on party walls, right? You should take the time to understand the process yourself, so that when you interview contractors, and they start talking about the project, that you can sort of see or understand and know that they know what they're talking about, right? Going in blindly and just trusting someone to just say, here's 50 grand, fix the house up, and I just want to show up when it's done. I think that's dangerous. You don't need to know like which wire to run to which outlet or which switch. That you don't have to be that granular, but you should know that the first thing you got to do is to make sure that your structure is there, then your framing, then your electrical, then your plumbing, right? And then insulation, drywall. Like you should at least know that basic process, because some contractors don't know, right? Like if you hear him say, "Well, we're gonna, build these bricks in the back and then drop some drywall here and then spackle and pick," like right off the rip that he doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think people think it's harder than it actually is to learn about that process. Like one thing I know, one of our speakers during the training program talks about is Google University, and how like you can get a construction education just from YouTube videos and Google that will help you, like you said, be one step ahead of the contractor if they're maybe not as experienced as they say they are.
Right, and you'll know what questions to ask too, right? So you kind of have to roll your sleeves up a little bit.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like you end up making mistakes that I did, whereby I just thought, well, he's a GC, I'm an investor, I just look at the numbers, he should know how to renovate the house. So all I need to do is just come up with a draw payment schedule and show up every week there's going to be improvements. Write them a check every week, and everything is going to be all fine and dandy. That's
Right.
usually not the case.
So now, since we have the benefit of you being a contractor, let's talk about the reverse situation, right? When a contractor is interacting with a developer, a potential client, or somebody that they're going to work on a project for, what I guess, how can you show to them that you know what you're doing and that you're going to be a valuable business venture for them, as opposed to just like if you don't do that research and that due diligence and that basic foundational understanding of the process, they might not even want to talk to you, or might not even, it could be the reverse is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, again, do a due diligence. I mean, you look up your contractors online, LinkedIn. We may have mutual connections that you can touch base with to see if I'm real. Do I have any ongoing projects, whether it be beginning, mid, or near the end, so that you can come see, my process. So I think those are probably the best ways to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's just important for people to understand that if you do kind of present yourself as unaware of what the process is going to be, or maybe you're kind of giving off that novice tone, right? They might take advantage of you, which is unfortunate. But there's bad people out there, and I think that's a good defense against that is proving that you're taking this just as seriously as they are, and you kind of respect their trade in a way.
Yeah, and as you interview other, and that's the other thing too, like interview, I would say 3 to 5 guys for every job, right? And just compare notes, right? Like, what did Pierre say? What did this guy say? Do they jive, right? Are they mentioning the same thing? Is Pierre like way off the rocker based on what he's telling you about the project, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's like I said, it's not a science. It's sort of just bringing all multiple estimates, and that's the other thing too. Start small, right? Don't just give someone your first project and it being a full gut renovation.
Right.
Give him some maintenance work, right? See how he handles that. Does he do it within budget? Does he do it on time? Was he easy to work with? Did he do what he said he was going to do, right? Was he successful at the small job, right? And just sort of grow the opportunity from there with him. But I highly recommend not giving a huge project on the first go around.
Right. Right. Okay. So moving on to my next question, I kind of want to bring it back to the perspective of a jump starter who, might be presented with a project that they, could purchase and rehab, and they're looking for a general contractor. So let's say not a full gut renovation, but it's like a kitchen, bath rehab, painting, flooring, that sort of thing. Like, what is the first interaction between a person and the potential general contractor? If say they get a reference, they're a friend tells them about a number and a name, and that they're really great, and you've done some research online, you've seen some work. Like in that first phone call, should you be giving them the full scope of what you want them to do and kind of lay out the whole plan? Or is it more of like, okay, let's, meet up for a chat, and then, okay, maybe I'll bring you to the project next week? Or on the other hand, is it like, show up at the time where my initial site visit is, and we'll take a look and give me a number, and I'll hire you right after that?
I think it depends on the urgency of the project, right? Like, if you're okay starting the project a month from now, you can sort of have these phone calls initially,
right,
and then slowly, meet on site. But I think the best thing is to meet on site. Meet on site. See what he has to say about the project. I think listening more than talking. Listening about how he approaches the project, what his plans are to get you from point A to point B in the project, visiting his projects as well. I think the real value is being on site. I don't think a phone call is really going to do enough justice.
If you're just tuning in, this is a conversation with Pierre Streat, principal of local business Strongbow General Contracting, to talk about how new developers can build contractor relationships and hire reliable, affordable labor for their rehab projects. Thanks for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. Hope you're enjoying the discussion. So let's talk about then the cost that you associate with that initial visit. Are most contractors going to charge you for that time?
Yeah, I mean, if for contractors who are doing like this kind of work, like full gut renovations, single families, they really shouldn't charge you for an estimate. I mean, unless you're looking at a commercial level type GC who you really want to do, one of these smaller projects. He's probably not even going to look at it anyway because how small it is. But the answer is no. Like, he shouldn't charge you anything. I mean, I certainly don't. I mean, if you're looking for work, you're going to make an effort to go see the project. It goes both ways, and that's part of the interview process too, right? Like, if you have to pay him, to come look at a job, does he really want the job? Right.
Right. Yeah. And I know there's probably going to be some questions about, like payment schedules and when do you pay the contractor? What if a contractor wants payment up front versus, so yeah, I guess we can talk about that now while we're talking about money. So typically, jump starters in contractors I talk to will say they want 30%, 40%, even half, maybe the payment that they're going to make to this contractor upfront before any work is completed. We usually tell them that's a bad idea, and that's probably a pretty red flag that this person's gonna skip out. But sometimes maybe people are only getting bids from people they trust and are really great, and there still maybe is a startup fee or something that they need up front. What do you suggest people do when they kind of are confronted with that decision where maybe they have a amazing contractor that they're really confident in, they got a good feeling about it, but that contractor comes and says, hey, I'm going to need this up front before you start, and that sort of thing? Yeah,
I mean, never give the majority of the money up front. I mean, you want to try and minimize your risk as much as possible. I mean, but it kind of has to work for both parties, within reason. I mean, he's going to need money to pay his laborers for the week or two. He's going to need money for the materials. He's going to need money for, I guess, fuel and transporting the supplies back and forth to the job site. But yeah, you want to try and minimize the upfront deposit as much as possible. And to be honest with you, when you are doing a full gut renovation, the majority of the cost is not so much on the upfront anyway, right? Demo is not really, a heavy lift in terms of money, right? It's demo, right? You're demoing the walls, you're demoing the frame, you're throwing in a truck and you're dumping it, right? So, if he's telling he needs 50% of the budget upfront to do that, that's a lie. And I guess that goes back to my point earlier about finding quality GCs, right? Like, a good GC can float the job, right? Like, he's probably going to have enough capital to float the second draw for the actual framing and plumbing and electrical on his own because he's holding it on his balance sheet, right? Like, those guys tend to be a little bit more expensive, but you can try to find the right balance.
Right. That's where the changeover is. It's like if you're not paying money up front, you're probably paying someone more for higher quality, trustworthy labor, right?
Right. Yeah. And, a lot of these guys, they take money from one project and, take it to another. And, it's kind of like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. In the best way possible. Right?
Best way possible. Right.
Yeah. So just one more question about the cost. You said you want to minimize that upfront percentage as much as possible. Is that something that a lot of contractors are willing to negotiate about? Like, will a contractor be offended if you come to them and say, hey, I'm not paying you 50% upfront, I'll give you 10 or 15 or something?
Yeah, I mean, he might be offended, but who cares if he's offended? At the end of the day, it's your project. Like, right. You own the bricks, right?
Exactly.
You own the bricks, you own the project, you're leading everything here.
And I think
give him an opportunity to explain why he needs that much. Like, just ask him line by line, itemize to me why you need that much. And if it makes sense, then maybe you do it. But otherwise, no.
Yeah, I that's great. Awesome. I think that's like the best advice we can give people is that you're in the driver's seat of this project, and that the way you're going to find reliable people is taking charge on the decisions that you're making, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's great advice. Okay, so just before we move on, any last tips on like vetting potential contractors? Other than doing some research to make sure they have a license, have a online presence, and are a real person.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a better answer. Like I said, it took me like 4 years to find my crew.
Yeah, well, that's
A
okay.
good 4 years, right? So
Yeah,
it's hard, it's difficult,
yeah,
but you just got to keep at it.
sure.
Like, and sometimes I found like when I find one good guy, he knows other good guys as well
Right,
at different traits. So
right,
that's kind of how it multiplies.
right. Great.
But
So now let's we talked a lot about like red flags and what could be potentially a reason you don't choose the contractor. Now let's talk about when you do find that one perfect one. Say you're working on a project, maybe you complete 2 or 3 small rehabs, and you're like, wow, this has been really great work each time. Guys have shown up on time, and the people that work there are respectable and nice. Like how do you know when you're like, this is a good contractor, I want to keep this one? Is there any sort of like milestones you should hit with somebody,
yeah, I
or
mean, you kind of know it, right? You kind of feel it. Like how did you work well with him throughout the project? Right? Like was he easy to work with? Like, did he do what he said he was going to do throughout the 8 weeks that you were working with him? Did he do it within budget? Right? Did he hit the timelines that he said he was going to do? I mean, and that's the other thing about kissing a ton of frogs is that when you find the right one, like it like right off by the
Mhm,
second week.
mhm,
Um, so, and then this also ties into like, how big do you want to build this business, right? Like, if you find a good one, you only have one project for him, you're going to be pretty upset that you lost him, because when you lose him, like I said, there's so much other business going on in Philly that when you find a good one, you got to latch onto him.
mhm,
But that all ties into how involved and how much business you want to build.
mhm,
If you think of this as something, you want to get to 100 properties, make sure you have more projects lined up for
mhm,
him or her.
mhm.
I mean, he has a family to feed as well. It's nothing personal. So, if you don't have work for him, he's going to jump someplace else.
Mhm. So
So,
what can the developer do to increase the likelihood of securing this contractor and continuing the relationship? I mean, there's obvious things like just reciprocating the effective and like just maintaining the relationship. But are there ways that you can kind of prove to that contractor, say, hey, if you keep working with me, this is what's going to happen?
yeah, I mean, I kind of take a different approach than most, because generally speaking, usually for whatever reason, people look down on laborers.
Mhm.
I try to be different. Like I treat them like they're my brothers, right?
Right.
Like I buy them lunch, I buy them beers after work. Like, I show them more respect than most,
Mhm.
and they appreciate that, right? Like I let them know that, hey, man, I know this is hard work. Like I know this is hard work. I see what you're doing, and trust me, like that goes a long way. Like when you talk about loyalty, if most developers are, just being aggressive with them and just being bossy and micromanaging, if you can prove that you are providing a work environment for them that is constructive, and they feel comfortable, and they feel like this, they can, like, when you go for a full-time job, right, you're looking to build a 30-year career, they want to have that kind of setup, or at least try to get that kind of setup too, right? And if you can provide that sort of environment for them where they feel like, well, hey, I can grow with this guy, they'll stick with you.
Great. And before I ask my last couple questions here, I just want to remind everybody that we'll have a Q&A in a few minutes here. So please do put your questions in the chat there, using, or sorry, not in the chat, in the Q&A tab, and submit those, and we'll get to them in a minute. My last kind of question is talking about during the project, and when you're maybe midway through your rehab, and you're working with this contractor, what are some like general guidelines and ways to maintain that relationship, like, and making sure that they're doing effective work without antagonizing them, or seeming like you're being untrustworthy
Yeah,
of them or anything like.
yeah. I mean, I do think in the beginning it's important to be on the job site. Like, don't just, give them a deposit and then show up a week later. Especially in the beginning, because, you might find some guys who go work someplace else, right, on your clock, right? The good guys won't do that, obviously, but it's also like you want them to have that feeling like you give a shit about, excuse my language, you care about the project, right? So, what I tend to do, I show up like once a day, right? So my guys get to work around 7:30. If they need materials, I'll probably be there around 8 or 9. But if not, I'll show up just, around lunchtime and buy them lunch or something and just get an update as far as what's going on. Listen, show respect. Unless you see something that's, way off the rocker, you let them know. And like I said, there's going to be issues, right? Don't flip out, because if you flip out, especially earlier on in the relationship, you're not going to see him again. Again, you're the business person, right? Like you got to keep your composure. Yeah, I don't want to say that they're your kids, but you got to have the business mindset. That issues are going to arise. You got to stay calm, manage them, give them another chance, and just work through it.
Great. Awesome. And yeah, I mean, that's, unless there's anything, additionally you want to share, I think that's everything I got to cover. That was a really awesome conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll kind of, before we shift over to the Q&A here, I want to give you a chance to, plug your business, obviously, Strongbow Contracting, general contracting. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about what sorts of what sorts of work you're looking for, and maybe kind of just, put out your advertisement to jumpstarters who might need contractors on their project.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the time. So yeah, Strongbow General Contracting. I'm not going to tell you what I can't do, but I basically do full gut renovation jobs. The only things that we sub out mostly is the excavation work for new development, and HVAC work. But when it comes to cement, structural, framing, plumbing, electrical, we handle all that. And we're pretty passionate about the single family 2 to 4 unit realm in Philly.
Great. And as we're talking here, the questions are piling in, so that's good. I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to have somebody, to point people to, and we'll be sure to send out Pierre's information in a follow-up email tomorrow, so you can get in contact with him. Is the best way to reach you, Pierre, just to follow that email or phone number on the contact? Cool.
Yes, sir.
Cool. All right, well, let's move on to these questions here. The first one, I believe we've already covered, but I'll just ask it to you to reiterate in case they missed it. When a contractor asks for half or even any money up front before even starting the project, how would you recommend the best way to handle? And that's from E. Santos.
Well, it depends on the scope of the project, right? Like if you're talking about a full gut renovation, single family, speed tops, you're talking about 8 weeks. So if you can break that up into 5th or 6th, I would say that's safe to do. But I would say, if you want to split around quarters or thirds, those divisions are too small. You kind of want to just split it up, given the timeline of the project. So I would say 6th or 7th is probably the best way. Okay.
Great. Donnell is asking, what is your pricing structure? Do you charge GC commission and additional over the subcontractor's fee? So that's about your business specifically. Is that something you could answer?
Yeah. So I do charge a management fee on top of the laborers and material costs. What I like to do originally, because I don't want to waste your time or waste mine. So what I like to do, initially is provide a labor only price. And then figure out if we're within range given your budget, because I've just met so many guys who haven't even they buy projects, but they don't really back into the numbers and figure out, well, shit, do I actually have enough money for the renovation? And I can help you, being I have experience on my end from the investor side, to figure out, well, can you actually get this project done before we even start, vetting other contractors? Does it even make sense? So yeah, I start with a labor only price. We see where we are, budget wise, and then you show me the finishes that you want on the project. If you have like a material list, we can go by, and then I'll just add in the material and management fee after that.
Great, awesome. And would you say that's is similar in line with other contractors, or do others?
Yeah, it is. It is. But depending on my work schedule, sometimes I'd lower my fee a little bit just to keep my guys busy. To be honest. Yeah.
Okay. The next question also comes from E. Santos. When do you recommend the time to give the contractor a 1099 form?
1099. That's a good question. I mean, I would give it at the end of the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
April Thompson's asking, do you suggest we hire a project manager to quality control? I guess that means the general contractor if I am strapped for time to review. So this is hiring another person, I guess, on top to manage the general contractor. What do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, if it's within your budget, and like I said, it's not worth your time, then yeah, I guess that's something you could do. But again, remember that person has to know how to manage a GC, because you don't want that. That's actually a good point. I've seen people do that, and the working relationship between the two are not good, and it pisses off the GC, and then the whole project's squashed, and you got to find someone else.
Right. Great. Next question is, okay, this is a very general question. It's all right if you don't have a great answer. What is the estimate on a total rehab if the house is already gutted? So I know the answer depends on a lot of factors, but what would you say is the ballpark average of a full gut rehab?
So a full gut single family, I mean, I would have to see the project, but
Right.
with construction costs being where they are now, labor and materials, you're talking like, I don't know, 80 to 90,
Right.
depending on the project. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, from your experience, what would you say that is compared to, say, a year or two ago?
I mean, when I first started buying in Philadelphia in 2016, my all-in was like 50K, 60K to purchase and rehab. I mean, now it's just astronomical. So it's changed a lot. I mean, but the prices of the properties have gone up too, and rents tandem. So I guess that kind of helps. But yeah, it's much more expensive now, especially on the material, especially on both sides, labor and materials. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if anything, it's increasing like the barrier to entry, where you need more capital up front to get started.
Sure.
Especially if you don't have any projects or haven't completed anything. Yeah. The next question is from Brian. He's saying, "Are you taking on any new projects at this time in the West Philly area specifically?"
Yeah, I am. I mean, I own I want to say 18 single families or 20 in West Philly,
Right.
and the other like 17 are scattered between Germantown, Port Richmond, and North Philly.
Cool.
I'm in West Philly all day, every day. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and another person asked, Pierre, how can we get in contact with you directly? Like I said, we'll send out your information in a follow-up email tomorrow morning. So you'll get, Pierre's email and phone number, and you can reach out to him afterwards. But yes, you will be able to contact him directly. Ronald is just confirming, is 5 to maybe 15% to begin the project if they ask, reasonable for a contractor? So I know, same question to what you asked before, but is that a more reasonable range than half up front?
Yeah, I think 5 to 15% most. Yeah, I think more closer to 15% is reasonable. Yeah.
Keith is wondering, if a project is behind, what recourse is there for the developer, and how do you maintain the contractor's motivation to complete the project? So sorry, I don't know if I phrased that weird. If a project is behind, I guess delayed and not on schedule, what recourse is there for the developer, and how do you maintain the contractor's motivation?
That's a great question.
Keith always has the best questions. Thank you, Keith.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go in there. I mean, how long have you been working with this contractor? Like, is it worth exiting a relationship because of this one project, right? Like, it goes back to what I was telling you earlier, right? Like, stuff happens, right? So you kind of have to look at a macro view of the relationship and decide whether it's worth continuing with him or not. Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors can go into that decision. I mean, I'd
Mhm.
have to know the details around it to sort of give a straight answer. But that's a good question.
Yeah, sure. And I think just from Jumpstart's perspective, not only with your contractor but also with your lender, if anything is going behind, the worst thing you can do is to stop communication. We see things fall apart so much just because people don't respond to emails or give up on following up with a contractor or something like that. It's communication is such a huge piece of just keeping things moving. I think even if it's like an insignificant update. It's better to check in and let people know what's going on than ghost it. So yeah, I agree. There's probably a lot of ways, but great
Yeah,
question.
that last question was very good. I mean, you kind of got to just, well, I mean, how far behind are you on the project? Like,
Right,
how much underwater dollar wise you are.
right,
I don't know those details, but
great,
yeah, you kind of got to look at it, holistically. Don't just make an irrational, emotional decision just based off one mishap.
great.
Yeah.
Brenda is asking, how would you know if the contractor has experience working with architectural drawings? So I guess she means from the perspective, I
Mhm.
mean, I sure as hell know I wouldn't understand an architectural drawing if I looked at it.
How would you know? Um, Again, fellow investors who know the guy, who know that
Right,
he knows how to read architectural drawings.
right,
It's funny, she brought that up because I actually met a guy. He owns a portfolio here as well, but he's not very good on the contracting end of things.
hmm,
The GC that he was using told him to accept these architectural drawings that were completely wrong. And I saw it right off the bat, right? In terms of like, for example, the ledger boards, for joist, that's the new building code in Philadelphia. And this architect was out of Jersey, right? And he was drawing it based on Jersey, code.
right,
Um, so yeah, that's very important to have a GC who knows how to read those plans,
great.
especially when you're pulling permits.
Right. And I like your answer that get an architect to look at it or get one of your friends who knows an architect or has seen architectural drawings, just get eyes on it, I guess, to make sure they look legit and that they're kind of seeing
Yeah.
the full picture.
Yep.
Yeah, great question, Brenda. Next question is from April. Have you worked on any conversions, an example from single family to duplex or quad, which is something we get a lot of questions about, provided, they plan to get a variance and it's not zoned, or I'm guessing she's saying they got the variance,
Yeah.
zoning is good. Would you work on, or have you worked on conversion projects?
Small conversion. I've converted RSA 5 to RM1, CMX2 duplex, triplex stuff in Philly.
Gotcha.
Nothing bigger than that, though. No.
Okay. And do you have any, I guess, like words of wisdom for people who are maybe thinking about one of those projects? Is it significantly more involved than
Now it is. Now it's a lot tougher now to get stuff through L&I. 2 years ago, it was easier to get variances.
yeah,
Would I recommend taking on projects now that require variances? No.
yeah,
Um, Especially with interest rates where they are, you're probably not going to get a response till 6 months from now, right?
right. And yeah, the rehab aspect might be a little bit more complex as compared to just like a single family rehab, but the legality and getting the end use to line up and getting the zoning change, that's where the headache really comes, right?
The
uh,
time,
yeah.
the time's a killer.
Right. And that's not something really that a contractor would help you out with, right? That's kind of all on the developer to go through that.
Well, I mean, it depends. I mean, if you're willing to pay for his time, to deal with L&I, sure.
Right.
But do most contractors want to deal with L&I? The answer is no.
Right. Just like the developer.
Unfortunately, the answer is no, right? Because I'm sure people on this webinar know how it is with L&I.
Yeah.
You hear one thing one day, the next day is something else, and it's just
Right. Yeah, we can have a whole other jumping on that. Yeah, all right. Thank you, April. And our last question here, it looks like, is from Brittany. And she said, do you take on complete development projects from empty parcels? I guess she means like new construction.
Construction.
Yeah.
So new construction I haven't done myself yet, but I do have contacts who actually do the excavation, who do the foundational work, who can do that for me. And then, we'll take it from there in terms of the framing and plumbing, electrical, etc.
Okay. And she says, if so, would you work with several architecture teams? Think in the Brewery Town, Fishtown, Northern Liberties area with a three-story with a roof deck. Like, is that in the scope of your could you do that?
Is the foundational work done?
I don't know. Brittany,
Yeah, I mean, if the foundational work is done and it's just framing onwards,
right?
That's where my specialty is. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. And yeah, I believe that's all our questions here. Thank you so much to everybody. Pierre, Pierre, is there any last things you want to mention to everybody before we head out, other than that they'll see your contact info in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, look, even if we don't do any business, I love talking to fellow investors, in Philadelphia and networking. So you have my contact info, reach out anytime.
Great.
Happy to help and catch up for beer and chat.
And that concludes my discussion with Pierre Streat, principal of a local business, Strongbow General Contracting, to talk about how new developers can build contractor relationships and hire reliable, affordable contractors for their rehab projects. The interviews on this program are recorded during Jumpstart Germantown's Jumpinar series, which takes place via Zoom webinar on Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. If you'd like to participate in the live Q&A with our guest, be sure to head to jumpstartgermantown.com/events and register for next week's Jumpinar. And if you're interested in starting a Jumpstart program in your own community, visit gojumpstart.org and see our how-to guide and open source training workbook. Thanks so much for listening to the Jumpstart Philly Real Estate Radio Show on Germantown Community Radio, WRGU 92.9 FM. And be sure to tune in next week.